Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Masters in Business with Barry Ritholtz on Bloomberg Radio.
This week on the podcast, I have a fascinating and extra special guest. Erika Ayers Badan had a background in marketing where she worked at a variety of places, from Fidelity to Microsoft to AOL to Yahoo, before she decided to take the role in 2016 as CEO of Barstool Sports, trying to herd the various cats at the pirate ship run by Dave Portnoy called Barstool Sports. She took the firm from a couple of $1 million in revenue up to $300 million in revenue and helped to sell it for about $500 million. She has a fascinating career, and the new book is really interesting that basically teaches people to, take control of their own careers, develop a vision and a plan, and then execute it. I thought the book was interesting, and I found our conversation to be fascinating, and I think you will also. With no further ado, my discussion with Erika Ayers Badan.
Thank you.
Did I get your name right? I feel like I'm butchering
You did
that.
a great job.
Oh, well, thank you. So let's begin with your background, which doesn't really lend itself to how your career went. You study at Colby College in Maine, and you end up with a degree in sociology. Was there any sort of career plan there?
No, I didn't really have I loved college. I didn't really have a career plan.
Who amongst us hated college?
I know, you got to love college. Right. I made the most of it. I probably peaked in college.
And I know you at one point were thinking about law school.
I was.
And I went to law school, and it's just like, how can I postpone reality
100%.
for another 3 years?
Keep the good times going.
Right, that's exactly right.
I liked sociology because you could write. It was a lot of reading and it was a lot of writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked the idea of studying people and groups. I had a really fantastic professor named Tom Morioni who I found really, really inspiring. I was a philosophy minor.
Same.
You were?
Yep,
Did you
absolutely.
Love it? I loved it.
I love philosophy,
Yeah.
and the joke I tell is I never submitted my existential final paper because what's the point? Right? And I wish that was a joke, but it's true.
It wasn't, yeah.
Right.
But I took I got an internship at Fidelity Investments when I was a junior,
Mm-hmm.
and it really gave me a taste for business, and I wanted to work in business. And at the time when I graduated, the economy was very good. So the fact that I had a sociology degree really didn't impede, I think, getting into business.
Mm-hmm. And you end up in like what some would think of as kind of a dry, legalistic part of Fidelity, the ERISA division, which focuses on retirement accounts.
It was very boring.
So did that motivate you to go to law school? Was that like, oh, no, I don't want to do any of this?
No, that made me become highly allergic to the concept of going to law school. I was bored. I made $50,000 my first job out of school, which for me was a lot of money.
Big money. What year was this?
I still think it's a lot of money. 1998.
Oh, so booming economy, $50,000 in the 90s for right out of college.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
That's probably double the starting salary. They were about $30,000 back
exactly.
then.
So I saw firsthand what it was like or what I perceived it would be like to work in a law firm. Mm-hmm. And I saw firsthand what it was like to mitigate risk. And I realized that I hated both of those things. So
wait, not risk averse, not interested in the picayune details.
Correct.
and small.
That's a great word.
It totally is. The interesting thing about having a career in business is the studies show 7 years post-graduation, half of the lawyers aren't practicing law. They go into business. Yep. It's a similar sort of prep, just sends you in a different route. So I know you, in the book, you write about wanting to come to New York City and being like, gee, this is a little intimidating, kind of giant. So you end up in Boston, relatively close to family in Vermont and New Hampshire.
Yep.
Where was the fam when you moved to Boston?
They were in New Hampshire.
Okay, so
It wasn't far. And most of my friends from college lived in Boston, so it also felt very safe.
Right, so you have a network built in. At Fidelity, you're working with the legal group doing ERISA work when an opportunity comes up on the Fidelity job board for digital marketing. So You're doing boring, and suddenly there's this new and exciting thing. What gave you the confidence to take that leap to something wholly different from your prior experience?
In hindsight, it was probably fairly reckless. I didn't have any money saved. The pay for the marketing job was $17,900, and I was making $50,000. But I was bored, and I was frustrated. I didn't like the feeling of being
That's a
bored.
third. You gave up 2/3 of your salary to take a job that you were interested in and perhaps would open up a different career plan.
Correct. And I was like, hey, screw it. I'm going to go for it.
So you leap from that position. First of all, how long did you stay at Fidelity in digital marketing?
I stayed another 2 years, maybe 3 years.
Uh-huh. Did you feel like you learned a lot during that
it was
period?
amazing. Loved it.
Amazing.
Loved
So we think of Fidelity as like this big, giant, stodgy asset manager. What was the digital marketing group like there?
The marketing and media group was interesting. It was run by women.
Really?
Yes, it was run by women. And it was, at that time, radio and television and print were the top dogs. So what you saw was a company spending hundreds of millions of dollars to acquire customers.
Now, if I remember correctly, late 90s, cracks in the facade were already showing of, the monolithic radio, TV, advertising world.
Yep. And that's really where I got my first big break, which was I worked in the internet, and nobody cared about the internet, which is why they hired me for it, because I was woefully unqualified to work.
Give it to the kid.
Give it to the kid. But I remember Fidelity, we paid $30 million to have keyword Fidelity on AOL, which is in hindsight a preposterous equation, but
it worked out.
But it worked out. So I really liked Fidelity because I saw how something operated at great scale. I saw something very serious. The marketing of an investment firm is not to be taken lightly. And I was also given a huge amount of opportunity because nobody believed in, cared about, or understood the internet.
Huh. That's amazing. Even in the late 90s, it's one thing if you say, hey, in the early 90s, this thing is kind of kludgy and it's got no consumer appeal. But by the late 90s, it was a full-on boom. I'm surprised. I guess that's the old Paul Graham line. Experts are experts in the way the world used to be.
Maybe.
Right?
Yeah.
So from Fidelity, you end up at some pretty big firms. What was your next stop after Fidelity?
So after Fidelity, I also found eventually myself wanting to put my hands into things. At Fidelity, I could buy the plan. I was a media buyer, so I could buy what someone else proposed to me. I could negotiate it. I could manipulate it slightly so that it worked for our objectives, but I was really buying. And what I wanted to do was the construction. So I left Fidelity and went and worked at a whole bunch of ad agencies. And I felt the ad agency experience would enable me to create marketing, not just buy marketing, if that makes sense.
But you found out it was all sales, right?
But it was all sales, exactly. So I then chewed through that as much as I could. And it was a great experience. An agency is a great apprenticeship. It's a great place to cut your teeth. You're on somebody else's dime. You're at somebody else's beck and call. You have to manage young people in very dynamic, ever-changing situations. You have to travel a lot. And you have to be able to pitch. And those were good skills for me to develop.
So you end up going from ad agencies to technology. You're at Microsoft, you're at AOL, you're at Yahoo. What was the order? How did those come about? And how different was that from the Fidelity/ad agency experiences?
Yeah. So, the same thing happened to me at the ad agencies where then I realized, whereas I'd realized at Fidelity I was just buying, at the agencies I realized I was just planning. I was still taking somebody else's ideas and putting them together in an order that made sense and delivered against an objective. But I really wanted to go make the thing. And I think working for Microsoft, which was the first publisher I worked for, that was my big break.
What division at Microsoft?
I worked
MSN
for MSN, yep, which is, in that day, which is hard to conceive of now, MSN, Yahoo, and AOL were it. Like they were the front doors to the internet. That's how you got your email. That's how you got all your news. That's where you got your entertainment.
Was your landing page on, I was going to say Chrome, but really it was Internet Explorer.
It was Explorer, exactly. And I had built something when I was on the agency side, I had built something for Volkswagen on MSN, where I was figuring out how MSN Music, you could configure a playlist, and I played it so that you could configure your cabriolet, which was the car the Volkswagen was launching. And it was very, it was a rainy day or top-down playlist. So I got my first taste of using technology and content and a user interface to deliver something to a consumer and also to pay off a brand marketing message. And I really loved it. And I went to go work for Microsoft to do just that.
Now, a prior guest I had, Joanna Bradford, was also at MSN, and I know you guys know each other. Is that where you met?
That's where I met her, yes.
You were working for her there?
I worked for a woman named Gail Troberman, who I write a lot about in the book, who worked for Joanne. But, I remember meeting Joanne. I somehow found myself invited to a MSN client retreat that Joanne was running, and I thought Joanne was fabulous. She's
a force of nature.
She is a force of nature, and she calls it like it is. And I really just wanted to work for Joanne. And then I did for the next 12 years. So that was great.
So at Microsoft, at AOL, and at Yahoo?
At Microsoft and Yahoo. And then I went to a company with Joanne pre-IPO called Demand Media.
Oh, sure. I remember that.
And then I went out on my own to go be the CMO of AOL.
And then CMO is a big position, especially at a shop like AOL. Back in the day, they were, the 800-pound gorilla. So Dave Portnoy is running this kind of regional blog that's picking up some traction, first out of Boston, later out of New York. It started out as a tear sheet he was handing out at train stations. Eventually, it becomes a little more substantive. What on earth led you to think, I know I'm going to leave these giant Microsoft, Yahoo, AOL, and go to this regional blog? How did that come about?
I always loved Barstool. So when I lived in Boston, Dave was handing out the paper at the train station until Dave figured out that pretty girls handing out a paper would sell more papers than Dave's
especially
handing out
sports,
papers.
right?
Absolutely.
To a male
sports
audience?
Comedy, yep.
Right.
So I had seen Barstool firsthand from the ground up. Most of the guys I was friends with would send Barstool stories in text. That's how people read Barstool. That's how guys read Barstool. They would text it in their group chats. And I thought they were wildly funny. Like, they just had a very divine sense of humor.
It was irreverent, it was raucous,
it was raucous.
No holds barred.
It was no holds barred. They said what everybody was thinking. They went up against every adversary they could. And I was feeling, I had made it through the corporate ladder. I had gotten to the job I had always wanted, which was a CMO job. I got there and I realized, I hate this. Like, I'm still desiring to like create something and build something and fix things and do things. And I was finding myself feeling suffocated at these big companies. And so I left AOL for a startup in music, and we had gone to the Chernin Group to raise money. And the Chernin Group said, hey, somebody made a throwaway comment in the meeting of, we've just invested in this company you've never heard of called Barstool Sports. And it was the record scratch, like, and I was like, I know Barstool Sports. I whipped out my phone. I was like, they have the jankiest app on the planet, but what a brilliant brand. And then I just wouldn't shut up about Barstool. And I left feeling very jealous, because I knew that they would find, some white guy with an MBA who worked in sports to go run Barstool. And I was kind of obsessed in that I want that job. I know that job is for me.
Are you a sports junkie? Are you one of these people?
I'm a sports,
I mean, in Boston, it's sort of, it's in the
not
water.
Be.
Right.
It's osmosis. Right. And it was, Barstool's run and the New England sports run, kind of coincided with one another.
So you had the Celtics, you had the Red Sox, you have the Patriots.
Yeah,
that was a great couple of decades.
It was. Not so much anymore. But I pursued every avenue I could to meet Dave. And I had a mutual friend. I had a woman in what I would call my women's mafia, another Colby grad, a woman I really respected, who the Chernin Group had brought on to advise Dave. And I just said, Betsy, you've got to introduce me to Dave. You've got to introduce me to Dave. You've got to introduce me to Dave. And finally she did, in a coffee shop in the West Village. And I remember running down 14th Street. I was late. I was wearing a dress. My kitten heels were like getting caught in the cobblestones. And I showed up like sweaty and kind of disheveled, but so excited. And I felt very alive. And I loved what Dave had to say. And we shared a great amount of enthusiasm for what Barstool could be. And that was really the end of that.
So as I was reading the book and you tell the story, albeit a very abbreviated version, I got the sense that, so Chernin takes 51% for a fairly modest valuation, $10 or $15 million. Yeah. You don't so much say this, but the implication is, oh, and we're giving you money, you have to professionalize, go hire a real CEO, yep. And we need to start seeing regular financials, and you guys got to grow up a little bit just on the organization side. And so did he, I think of him as day trader Davey. I don't see him hiring a white NBA sports dude. That's not his
That's the
style.
opposite of who he is. For people who pay attention to Dave, you would see how that would never work. Now, that said, they went through, 50, 75 candidates before they got to me. I was the only woman, and I was the last of a long line of sports dudes. Uh-huh. But I think what made Dave and I work and click is a couple things. One is that Dave has this really great gift. Around that same time, I was talking to other companies, and there's a lot of founders, and especially big personality founders, who say they want a business person, but they really don't. They want to be the business person and the star and the personality. And Dave,
delegating is really hard, and giving up control is really difficult.
Giving up control is hard. And Dave, to his credit, really wanted that, and he had no ego in it. And I also worked really hard to gain Dave's trust, and I listened and I learned and I watched everything I possibly could so that I understood what he was trying to do, and then I brought what I was capable of to that, and kind of the alchemy created, really, really electric place.
And let's be blunt and honest. Dave Portnoy is incredibly entertaining, even if that persona is an exaggeration of who he is, but no one wants him doing the payroll or the healthcare.
Yeah, Dave doesn't want to be doing
Dave doesn't want to be doing
I
can imagine letting go of that stuff
Absolutely.
Is really easy to focus on what he does best, which is the creative side, the entertainment side, the larger-than-life talent.
Yep.
And even just the silly thing like the pizza reviews, mm-hmm. the one-bite pizza reviews, his personality is what's turned that into a huge success.
Yeah, he's the biggest food reviewer in the world.
Crazy, right? Yeah. Isn't that?
Yeah,
so we'll talk a little bit about Barstool Sports next. I want to stay with your role as CEO. You describe yourself as the token CEO, and not only do you embrace that label, which some people said, oh, Barstool hired a woman? They hired a chick? Oh, she must be a token CEO. You literally name a podcast token CEO.
Yes.
So first, tell us about that label and why you embrace it as a way to take control of it.
I thought it was so rude. People would say, I think people said it in conversation, and then it was said in the media quite a bit.
Really?
Yes, definitely, all the time. That the only reason I was at Barstool Sports or hired to Barstool Sports was that I wore a skirt, that I would wash, the sins of Barstool, that I was to make Barstool look something like it wasn't, that I was the beard, essentially. And so the moniker people said was that she's a token CEO.
I remember when you got hired, because I had been off in the distance. So I've been writing publicly and on a blog since 2003, and suddenly a sports blog starts to get hot. I'm paying attention out of the corner of my eye. And I had the exact opposite. I'm like, if that frat house hired a chick to be CEO, she's got to be bad. She's got to really know sports. She's got to not take any crap from those, they're a bunch of animals. She's got to be a tough broad who's going to come in and say, here's what we're going to do. Let's go at it. And as I was reading that, I'm like, I just had the opposite assumption that a token CEO would have lasted a week
Oh,
there.
100%.
Right? Would have crumpled and blown away in the wind. It was just, anyone who said that had no idea what was going on.
Yeah, I think so. But anyways, it made me mad enough that I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to own this now.
That's really interesting.
That's what I did.
So you described the first meeting connecting with Portnoy. He's an outspoken founder, and he surrounded himself with all these wild personalities. By the way, the whole thing to me was very parallel to Howard Stern and surrounding himself with that crew. How did you find working with him and all the different personalities at Barstool?
Oh, I loved it. I will never love a job the way I loved Barstool.
Really?
I loved it. I loved every second of it. It was amazing.
What were the challenges with such a disparate, raucous crew?
You know, I was there almost a decade. So I look back on those early days where, I was stressed about payroll. They were offending someone by the minute. I had to keep them very busy. I kept them very busy. But we stepped in it all the time, and the business was just very, very fragile. And it was, there were, in the early days, there was probably 14 of us in a one-floor office and nomad. And then there were 65 people crammed in the same office. Like the growth we had, the journey we were on, the stuff we were experimenting with, the way we were thinking about media and content and commerce, and it was just very, very forward, and it was very free.
So when you say the business was fragile when you first joined, the growth was explosive. They just got a big chunk of capital from an outside investor. Why was it so fragile?
Well, most of the capital went to the secondary. So the business itself probably had, $2 million. So we had to grow this business on...
$2 million is like a 6-month runway, that?
These days, it's nothing. But we were incredibly cost conscious. When I got to Barstool, there wasn't an office. We didn't have a P&L. There just wasn't any infrastructure, but it was this incredible luxury where I could build something from scratch. And that's what made it so incredibly fun. And I built it from scratch with a bunch of people who were wildly talented, but very underestimated, and never, no one ever had Barstool's back. And, we grew and evolved in a very challenging time, in a challenging time in comedy, in a challenging time in politics, and in a challenging time in media, obviously. And to be able to be that forward on a very small P&L and go up against companies 10, 100, 200 times our size was, it was exhilarating.
Wow, sounds like a lot of fun. So let's talk a little bit about what you did to take Barstool from really a local ragtag group of maniacs that was growing rapidly and turn them into a real business. I assume part of the original investment, the 51% from Peter Chernon's media group, was, hey, you guys have to get a real CEO. Tell us about the process after you had the interview with Dave Portnoy. How long was it before you became CEO?
Oh, I think I started working pretty immediately.
A day, a week, a month?
Probably 2. I think I went through 2 weeks of interviews, and the recruiters had to be caught up and placated because none of their candidates got the job. But
do they get paid?
I think they get paid
outside?
Regardless.
Right.
I hope so. Nice
gig.
Yeah, exactly. But I started working pretty immediately because the Chernin Group had invested, and they had 6 months. They're in California. Dave was in Boston and then New York. And really what we set about doing is we had a very clear vision to grow. We had a very clear vision to make content and comedy. And Barstool is really a comedy operation dressed up as sports or dressed up as lifestyle. And I really wanted them to move beyond the blog. When I got to Barstool in 2016, it was predominantly a blog operation. Podcasting was just starting. Pardon My Take, which is the biggest sports podcast in the world, was probably 2 episodes in. KFC Radio was maybe a month worth of episodes in. So when I got there, we really set about exploding the amount of content that we made. and then to be able to distribute it very, very rapidly. One of the things that was true when I got to Barstool, I knew going into it, was that no one was coming to help us. There wasn't going to be, ESPN wasn't going to help us. The big media platforms weren't going to help us. Big advertisers would never give Barstool Sports a look the way they do now. So we had to fuel ourselves of our own propulsion. Every dollar we spent, we agonized over. Every move that we made, we were maniacal about, is this working to gain audience or is it not? And then we had the gift of insanely talented and funny people and a time on the internet that was incredibly less cluttered than it is now.
Right. So not only was social media functional back then, it was relatively easy for something to pop up on everybody's feed.
Yep.
As balkanized as media has become over the past 25 years, the 2010s felt like something could still rise to the top.
You could build stars. You could
Right.
break out. Like if you look today at 2024 in music, you can't break out a star anymore.
Well,
it's
that
over.
woman Taylor Swift seems to be doing okay, right?
Because she's been around for a
Right.
while.
She's been. I'm
know?
trying to think of who is the hottest new band, and I come up with things like Imagine Dragons, and they're 10 years old.
Exactly.
There's nobody.
Yeah, there's no
like
new...
I'm trying to think of who else is new.
And Barstool was the same, which is Barstool was started by Dave in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very old internet brand by internet brand standards.
So I want to get into the transition of you landing as CEO and then this incredible 5,000% growth.
Yeah.
That takes like.
What I do?
What was I'm kind of curious what the first couple of months were like, getting your feet wet, getting to really know the personalities, not just from their content, and trying to impose some degree of discipline and organizational structure on what Vanity Fair called a pirate ship.
Yeah, I mean, it was chaos, and it was chaos, it was chaos in the best way. I really believed that it was a highly volatile business, and I did not want to go back with my tail between my legs. So I was like, we are going to make this work no matter what. So the first thing we did was to diversify the content and explode the productivity. Everything at Barstool to this day is really monitored on productivity. Mm-hmm. The second was I created a very diverse business model. When the advertisers were mad at Barstool because somebody said something stupid, we shifted to the commerce business. When the commerce business went down, we pivoted back to ads. So I was very intentional about growing multiple lines of revenue. We had t-shirt revenue, we had ad revenue, we over time had licensing and product development revenue, we had live events revenue, for a time we had subscription revenue. And so having all of those levers to pull enabled me to be calm in a sea of content and chaos and at times controversy, because I always knew I could dial one up and dial one down. And we set to do that. The second thing we really did was we learned how to live on other platforms, which is something most media did not do. As
other platforms like YouTube, Twitter,
Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, SiriusXM. SiriusXM was one of the first big breaks for Barstool. But I wanted to exist on every single platform out there, and I wanted to make the most of that platform. So I can remember going to Facebook. I write about this in the book. When I was 2016, I had a meeting with Facebook that somebody gave to me as a favor, and the sports guy at Facebook pats me on the head and is like, "Good luck with your regional sports blog." That was the quote. And I was like, all right. So what I did was Facebook had just launched Facebook Live and Twitter had just bought Periscope. Both were live streaming platforms. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I will show you. So we put our talent on Facebook until we crashed their live stream because we had so many people on it and so many people commenting. And then I moved them over to Periscope until we crashed Periscope. And then I would move them back to Facebook. So it made everybody pay attention. And then we really set about learning how to thrive on those platforms.
So you mentioned multiple lines of revenue. And earlier you used one of my favorite words. You said the jankiest app ever. You would think that building an app isn't that hard in the modern era. what was the problem with the app and what did you do to fix that? Because you know, everybody walks around with a phone in their pocket.
Yeah.
I think more people access, I don't care, Instagram, TikTok, whatever it is, through their phone than their desktop, right? Even in the late 2010s. Tell us about the project rebuilding the app.
Oh, the app was a disaster. I mean, when I got there, I think they had an IT person part-time.
Right.
Like 15 hours a week or something. So,
some high school kid working after school?
No, he was a really talented guy, but
okay.
So we hired him full-time. And then we hired more engineers and we hired product people, and you know, we made the app functional. You can watch video in the app. You could read a blog in the app. You could listen to our podcasts in the app. So, you know, a lot of it, we had all the right problems in a way where we had audience, we had content that people liked and responded to. We had a workhorse team where Barstool is very mission driven. It is a punch above its weight. It's a bunch of misfits who are rallied, and we had the right company DNA, and we just had all the wrong stuff that most normal companies had. And the places I had been, we were good at that stuff. So it was really keeping and preserving the nucleus and then applying that logic.
I love this quote, and we're going to talk about the book in a minute, but you wrote, "It was a heart attack every day for 9 years."
Yes.
That sounds kind of like, talk about stressful, but fun.
It was amazing. I mean, it was just very alive. It was a heart attack every day. It was a heart attack because you never knew where stuff was coming from. Your head was on a swivel 24/7 at Barstool. And that's what made Barstool so great. And, you know, I took a lot of because I had done this interview with the New York Times and probably 2017, 2018. And I said that when I was interviewing candidates to work at Barstool, I texted them at night or on the weekends. And it became this like kind of international, like, oh my God, she's a, you know.
You want to know how online they are and how quick they are to respond,
like,
and are they serious?
We work in sports. Sports happens on nights and weekends and on holiday weekend and on holidays. And the stuff that goes wrong at Barstool goes wrong at Friday afternoon at 7:30 or Friday evening. So I needed people who were bought into that. And if you weren't going to buy into that, you should just not come here. And
that's the brown M&Ms with Van Halen. It's the same. You know, they used to put no brown M&Ms in the rider because they want to know someone has read to page 10 of a 15-page rider with all the complicated electronics and setup. If you're texting somebody on Thanksgiving Day, right, because we're watching the Ohio-Michigan game, and they don't respond, they're probably not
they're not right. They're not right to work here.
Right.
And this isn't right for them. You know, speaking of Thanksgiving, like Thanksgiving night, we always launched a Black Friday sale at midnight on Thanksgiving, and we would work until 4 a.m. getting people's orders, getting orders out. If you don't want to do that, you should not work at Barstool Sports.
So here's the question. It's a heart attack every day. The app is janky. The Times is trying to cancel you. How do you morph that into 5,000% revenue gains, ultimately leading multiple sales of the company for $500 million? That seems like quite a challenge.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was awesome. I think there was so much noise. There was so much noise that it almost became quiet, if that made sense. There was too much to pay attention to, so I really chose to only focus on Barstool. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a criticism. Everyone had a sky is falling moment about this, that, or the other thing. And there was such a cacophony of all of that and more that it really made it quite almost peaceful in the inside, because
eye of the hurricane.
You're in the eye of the hurricane. And I said it when I joined Barstool. I don't know if I wrote about it in the book, but I had a choice. I had a choice to either apologize to everyone Barstool had offended or try to placate everyone who didn't like Barstool or had concerns about Barstool. And don't get me wrong, I did spend a huge amount of time doing that. But that wasn't why I was there, and that wasn't actually what I was very interested in. I was interested in, we had a tiger by the tail. It was the right time in the internet. It was the right time in podcasting. It was the right time in comedy. We had insanely talented people, and we just needed to let the tiger out of the cage and like try to keep up.
So we have kind of a cancel culture that has reared its head, especially in comedy. Do you think Barstool succeeded despite cancel culture or because of cancel culture? Was it the pushback to that?
It's a great question. I think Barstool always was aided by an enemy, having an enemy.
You had to have someone to fight against.
You had to have
lean
someone
against,
to fight against. You had to have something
rally
to
the troops.
define yourself by. And look, I think most editorial people, business people, and certainly comics were canceled. And the only ones who did not get canceled were those that pushed back. And Barstool was very good at pushing back. We were very, very good at that.
So how do you look at the media world today, be it social media and TikTok? YouTube has kind of grown up, and even blogs have kind of become mainstreamed.
Yep.
What do you see based on all your experiences at Barstool when you look out at the world?
Oh, I think media is so interesting. I think media, as most people in their 50s or late 40s, 50s would say, it's dead. Traditional media does not have the hold. It is not defining. It is not definitive. Things do not have a clear beginning and ending. Everything is amorphous. Everything is living on different feeds and is so fast. Like, media has become so very fast.
I know this isn't new. I read about this in the late 2010s, 18, 19, 20. Something went a little viral over the weekend on Twitter where this woman, it actually comes from an Insta video. She and her boyfriend, each on their phones, she's like, oh, check out this video on Insta. And she sends it to him, and they're both kind of shocked to see they each have completely different comments. It's not their video. They're viewing someone else's video. But because of the way the algorithm, you're
Gives you
served
what you
up
wanna
different
hear.
comments.
Yeah.
And he gets these very dude-oriented, the chick is crazy comments. And she's like, I don't understand. Why is he not empathetic?
Yep.
And it's like, wait, it's the same video. No wonder
Yeah.
nobody can get along. We're not even living in the same media world.
Well, exactly. The world, everyone is in a bubble, and they're, speaking of cacophony, like, you're just served more of what you're interested in, whether it's somebody's opinion, whether it's a piece of content, whether it's the next video. And it's a difficult, it's scary. I actually think it's quite scary.
Well, when everybody lives in their own world, it's one thing to have separate opinions. Yeah. Now everybody has separate facts, but that's a whole nother thing. So I mentioned Barstool was sold. Let's go over that. So you have the initial investment, 51% for about $15 million.
Yep.
3 subsequent sales. In 2020, Penn National Gaming acquires 36% for $163 million. Mm-hmm. That gives Barstool a $500 million valuation. That's real money.
Yes.
Tell us about that acquisition.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing. I spent a year of my life on that deal. And, Dave and I knew when PASPA was repealed. Mm-hmm. When PASPA was repealed.
Define PASPA for people who are not familiar.
PASPA was legalized sports betting. State by state. And
right. So the Supreme Court case throws out something, and then suddenly all bets are on.
All bets were on. Right. And so we knew we were always looking for an acquisition. So in the early days of Barstool, or at least early days of my time, 2016, 2017, 2018, the bet was that it would be a media company who would acquire Barstool. It was becoming more evident as time went on that it was not going to be ESPN or Disney who were going to
gambling. Perfect.
And so the avenue was sports gambling. So the gun went off. And, we met with all different types of sports betting operators, and Penn, came to the table and became the right partner at the time for Barstool. And so they bought, they were deliberate about it, where they bought a 36% stake, and then I think 2 or 3 years later they would buy the balance of the company.
And that was the remaining 64% for $388 million. Now, you don't mention in the book if you were incentivized with stock, but I assume you're joining a startup. Of course you want some equity.
Definitely, yeah.
What led them in 2023 to say, all right, we want the whole thing?
There was a series of puts and calls in the deal, obviously. And the bet that Penn was making was Penn needed a brand for its sports betting operation. They needed a partner who could drive audience, and they had a belief at the time of driving growth profitably, whereby you could organically acquire customers. The single biggest cost in sports betting is the acquisition of bettors. Bettors are fickle, they're smart, they're going for the best deal or offer or best odds.
They know math.
They know math.
Or at least the better
sharp.
ones do,
exactly,
right?
Exactly. And Penn wanted to arrive with a brand, and they felt that Barstool could offer that to them better than they could grow themselves. And so we rode with Penn the sports betting introduction, the rollout across 19, 20, 21 states. And then when they acquired Barstool, the intention was to grow the Barstool Sportsbook brand, which was the sportsbook brand, to grow downloads and acquisitions of customers to the app, and to continue to run the media business.
So this is 3 years or so in, and then late last year, they decide, you know what, we can't stick with Barstool. It's causing other frictions. They sell it back to Portnoy for $1, along with a non-compete, and if he sells it, they get 50%. What led them to saying, all right, this isn't working out for us legally or financially?
Yeah, I mean, I think the marriage between Barstool and Penn was tough, right? Penn, one is that it's a publicly traded company, highly regulated. Sports betting is, at the time was so nascent in this country, and if you think about it, they had all of these different state regulators. They had different levels of concerns. Barstool would flare up in the news, and it would create a nightmare for Penn in terms of how are they going to manage the street? How are they going to placate the analysts? How are they going to explain this to the regulators? And it became a lot. So that's kind of the first part of it. And then the second part is you had this kind of wild, free-form, very organic, very exploratory comedy, sports, media, lifestyle brand. And you're fitting it into a casino operator that, again, is highly regulated and publicly traded. Like the DNA was insanely different. And, I think at some point it became very obvious that this was not going to be the right path for Penn's sports betting, platform in the future.
I'm always shocked when I see an acquisition where it's obvious. You want to get the good and the bad, and when you make an acquisition like that, it's warts and all. But nobody can ever accuse Portnoy of saying, "Oh, you really didn't reveal who you were." I mean, he's an open book.
It was very clear who we were.
Kind of makes you wonder what they're thinking.
Look, I think they wanted a brand, and I think it was very smart. To be honest with you, Barstool is the most engaging, fastest growing, covers more sports with more level of interest with a very young demographic, or not very young, but, a 20 to 39-year-old audience. Which is tough to acquire. It's impossible to acquire.
So was this a win for Penn? I mean, net, they spend $500 million. By the time they're done, it's probably closer to $750 million. Over those 3 years, did they capture enough clients or revenue to make this worthwhile? I mean, it's obviously a win for Dave, and it's obviously a win for Barstool. Was it a break even for Penn? Was it a loss? I
don't know. That's a great question. I don't think I'd be the right person to answer that. I think there was an incredible database built. With the Barstool Sportsbook fans. 2 is, I think we all learned an incredible amount. And 3, I think they'll go into 2024, 2025, 2026, obviously with ESPN. way smarter than they went in with us in 2019.
Mm-hmm. Why did you want to write a book? It's so much work.
It is so much work. I wanted to write a book. I started writing the book after the first Penn acquisition.
Mm-hmm.
And I had enjoyed prior to that a very fast-paced, fast-growing, highly consuming time at Barstool that was insanely creative. And when we started to become more and more integrated with Penn, I found my job becoming more and more about big company things versus exploring frontiers of the internet. And I was kind of missing the creativity. So I started to write notes on my phone on the train on my commute. And I had started a podcast over the pandemic because when the lockdown first happened, I was making a habit of emailing every person at Barstool every week, which was an insanely stupid endeavor. So I would start with the A's and then I'd get to the Z's, but it was 250 people. So
it wasn't a group email?
No,
I
emailed just checking in, which was insanely dumb. And then I created a podcast, like a 10-minute-a-day podcast, because it was easier, obviously, to do one-to-many versus one-to-one. But I really had wanted to connect. And one of the things that kind of developed out of the podcast was I like to work. I like to talk about work. I like to think about work. I think about work all the time. I'm curious how people behave at work. I have a very strong opinion about work. And we started to create this Q&A section where now, I probably get 1,000 DMs a week of just work questions like, my boss is an idiot, or I hate my coworkers, or how do I ask for a raise, or what happens after maternity leave. And what I started to realize is that there's no one who is in the middle of their career talking about a career in a way that I think young people can relate to or identify with or reject, but that it's a conversation. Work is a conversation. And so I found myself with a lot to say.
That's interesting. I want to ask you about the writing process. Working with a group of people, pirate ship or otherwise, is a very collaborative, interactive process. I really love writing, but I find it's very much you're by yourself. Yeah. It's very introspective, and as creative as it is, it's so different than working with a group of people. How did you find that relative to the organized chaos you were dealing with?
It's I had the same experience, Barry, where it's lonely. It's very intense. I find it very emotional, where it's like you have all of these things spilling out of you onto this page, and you're feeling through your fingertips. I found it hard to turn it off and turn it on. When you're dealing with problems at work or the demands of the day, it's like, like you just move your way through it. Writing it's a very sedentary It's a very sedentary exercise, which is very difficult for me. But I felt very strongly. We cut so much out of this book. I actually wrote probably a book 2 times this long.
Only twice? Then you've done better than many. Because what's the old joke? I apologize for the length of the letter. I didn't have time to make it shorter.
Exactly.
It's the secret is respecting the audience's time and cutting out anything that isn't, muscle and sinew.
Yep.
And that's hard.
Yeah, it's super hard.
A lot of writers find that's their fail point because they fall in love with their own words and they don't realize.
And they become religious about it.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the book. First, I got to start. I love the title. Nobody cares about your career. Give us a little color on that.
Yeah, I think, we were struggling to find a book title, and Nobody Cares About Your Career is a chapter in the book. And why I like it as a title is that it's true. Like, nobody cares about your career. You should do what makes you happy. You should give yourself to it fully, and you should make choices in your career, and I would argue your life, that are good for you, not because you think it's what you should be doing or it's what you think somebody else would want from you. And so that's really the genesis of the title, which is you have to be in it for you.
I have a chapter in an upcoming book about you're responsible for your portfolio. I may have to steal this and change it. Nobody cares about your portfolio.
You should.
Because really what you're saying is hey, it's and you the whole back third of the book is this is your life, your career. You're the one who's going to make it or break it. If you're waiting for the cavalry to come,
forget it.
I got some bad news for you. So I really thought the title was great. The ultimate playbook for crushing it at work. How do you define crushing it at work?
I think crushing it at work is loving your work. I think it's very in vogue right now to not love your work. I think it's popular. I think it's kind of cool.
Quiet quitting.
So
annoying.
Lazy girl summer, blah, blah, blah.
That one I haven't heard. What is Lazy girl summer?
summer.
Oh, okay. I missed
Lazy
it.
girl summer is like, I talk about this in the book, which is lazy girl summer is like you just want to have better photos on your Instagram or better short videos on your TikTok about your weekend. And, that's what you should be living for. But I really believe that work is, and I write about this, is that work is tuition. It's education that you get paid for, which is awesome. Huh. And crushing it at work is making the most of your work so that you get the most out of it. You get the most education. You get the most experience. You develop the most resilience you can. And what I think people need to hear at work is you're going to get out of it what you put into it, but also even if you make a meager salary or you have a boss that sucks or you hate the industry you work in, there is something to learn and something to do that you can take with you.
Right. That's interesting. I've been through all those. Since you brought up education, let me skip ahead. Learning is everything. That chapter totally resonated with me. Learn something from everyone. Just shut up and listen and make learning a game. Tell us about why learning is so important to somebody young and new in their career.
Yeah, my parents were teachers, so whether my brother and I wanted to or not, we were going to be learning. Like we didn't grow up with a television. You could like play sports or stack wood or read a book, or do chores. Those are the 4 options in my house. But I really believe that you can learn something from everyone. I talk a little bit about my first internship job at Fidelity, and you know what? The people I could learn from were the secretaries. And I learned everything I humanly could from those secretaries, and they were incredible, and they taught me so much. I learned from Steve Ballmer and Joanne Bradford and other greats at Microsoft. You can learn from the receptionist. You can learn from the janitor. I think learning is about being curious and about putting your ego and your perception of who you are and what you do and why you're so great. You got to put all of that aside and you're like, what's in front of me and what can I learn from this?
That sounds very humble, which is not the word that comes to mind when you think Barstool Sports. Humility doesn't kind of pop into your mind, but what you're really describing is something that's very humble.
You have to be humble. If I had gone into Barstool and been, like King Kong'd the thing and like beat my chest and been like, I know how this is going to work. This is how we're going to do it. I have it all figured out. They would have kicked me out immediately because none of those things are true. And a lot of what I write about in the book is like your insecurity is one of your greatest strengths. Because
explain that. That's interesting.
Because if you can be humble and you can recognize that while, yes, you know a lot and you are capable of a great deal, you have a lot to learn, you have a lot to assess, you have a lot to intuitively feel and ascertain, it enables you to still pursue your vision and pursue your accomplishments, but while gaining insight from others. And in that process of gaining insight, you will create trust and you will create, a tighter connection with people. And I think that's sometimes where people miss out. And it's, look, most people right now work over Zoom. It's hard to create connection over Zoom. It's hard to learn over Zoom.
Especially for young people, you learn through osmosis, through not just mentorship, but just being in the thick of it.
In the mix. You just got to be in the mix. So, I think this book is really about get over yourself, get over your ego, get over your insecurity, get over whatever you think you're great at or you're terrible at. Put yourself in a situation where you can gain as much information as possible. Put that into your quiver and go out to battle.
Let's talk about failure. There are a bunch of quotes in the book. about why you should, why failure is the best teacher. I like falling down is the best way to get good at getting up. But you literally start a chapter, fail. Seriously, fail. Explain.
Yeah, I think failure is good. Like I've failed all the time. I still fail all the time. And the thing about failing is everyone is human. They're going to fail, until we all work with robots and chat GPT, like there's going to be failure in every enterprise you go after, work, life, family, you name it, health, whatever. And the problem I see is if you do not get comfortable failing, you start to calcify. And when you calcify, you become quite brittle. And if someone knocks you over even ever so slightly, you will break. And failing a lot means that you're trying a lot of things. It's actually an indicator that you're learning a great deal. And being nimble and being fluid and being on the edge and being willing to trip and mess up and then course correct, it is such a shortcut to growth.
If you're not failing, it really means you're too risk averse and you're not taking any chances.
Yeah, you're not trying.
Like not everything is bat on the ball and you make it to first.
Exactly.
Sometimes you got to swing, and that means you're going to strike out occasionally. Yep. Right. People have the wrong attitude about failure. My pet theory is the reason Silicon Valley is as successful as it is in the United States is such an entrepreneurial nation is the penalty for failure in Europe is pretty egregious. You fail in the United States, no one really thinks twice. You pick yourself up, try again.
It's like the American dream.
There is no scarlet letter for failure, but old Europe has a very different attitude about that.
Yeah, I think failure is really, really, really important. And look, there are big failures and there's little failures. If you're learning and trying things, you're going to fail every day. Think about an athlete. You play a game for 60 minutes and you don't kick every ball the right way. You don't make every pass the right way. You don't, execute perfectly every time. Learning how to be able to do that and to get iteratively better. It's actually the only way to get iteratively better.
The Michael Jordan quote, I've succeeded because I've taken so many last-minute shots that I've missed. I've missed 11,000, whatever the line is great. But I want to bring it to you. What failures can you identify in your experience that ultimately led to a more positive outcome?
Oh, I mean, so many. I fail all the time. I made so many mistakes at Barstool. I made so many mistakes at every job before I went to Barstool. I'm making mistakes at Food 52 literally as we speak. So, and I think the types of mistakes are, the good thing about mistakes is it gives you this ability to trust your gut, which is also what I talk a lot about in the book. So, my mistakes have been, I struck the wrong partnership. I knew it was wrong, but I did it anyways. I made bad hires. I made bad decisions. I trusted people I shouldn't. I came up short when I wished I didn't. And I think the good news about failing is, one, if you fail a lot, it just gives you something to think about. And you're like, oh, gosh, I would have, my gut told me I should have handled it this way and I didn't handle it that way. Next time I'm going to. And I think it's just that inner monologue of really post-action review for yourself, which is partly nobody cares about your career. Like you should be post-morteming yourself all the time. And I think that review helps you internalize and make a better choice the next time, which in turn helps you take on more the next time.
There are two related quotes that I have to ask you about, and they both seem to be about sports, but I wonder if they're really not. The first is, the great ones play hurt, which is right from the cover of the book, from the subtitle. I mean, obviously, we understand what that means in sports, but how do you relate this to your professional life?
Yeah, I love that line. I think it's just a great line. I trademarked it. But
did you really?
I did. The great ones play hurt.
That has never been trademarked before.
No,
I mean,
isn't
it's
that
such
strange?
Wow, that's amazing.
I'm like a trademarking machine. I'll trademark anything. But which is too stupid, but I do it. The great ones play hurt is about resilience. And when you see it on the football field or you see it in athletics, there's a heroism to it, So
it's exhaustion, injury,
exhaustion,
just frustration.
Chips are down. It's you're somehow held back or coming from behind. And what it really is about, it's about will, and it's about perseverance, and it is about an inner strength that propels you to go further than you by, passing observation think you could. And so I think what's important at work is I think a lot of times people just throw in the towel and they say, we're behind, or
you're frustrated and that's it.
My arm's tied behind my back, or, this is stupid how this is done. And then they give up. And the reality is that because work is full of humans, work is flawed, people are flawed, businesses are flawed, industries are flawed, things change, and you have to be able to persevere through that even when hurt. And the great ones do that.
Really interesting. And then the sort of related quote that, again, another thing that resonated with me, your environment will always be relentless.
Yes.
Explain.
I am a big believer in this one. So it's osmosis. We've actually talked a lot about it, where your environment is relentless. If you surround yourself or find yourself in a job or in a social circle or wherever with a bunch of people who are not motivated, negative, pessimistic, complacent, comfortable, even if you have the biggest spark of life or the biggest amount of drive, they will get to you. It will assimilate into you. And positivity is relentless. Negativity is relentless. And so the environment you put yourself in is critically, critically important. I always wanted to put myself in an environment where, we had talked about Joanne at the beginning of this. I worked for a relentless, harsh woman. And the reason I got as close to Joanne as I humanly could for as long as I could, because I knew that relentlessness and the bluntness and the directness, one, there was a lot of love behind it, but two, it would make me better.
Right. A ton of insight and a ton of, she's a three-dimensional chess player.
She's got it all.
Yeah,
and I knew that was relentless, and I knew she could take me and morph me into places that I could not get to myself. And that's choosing an environment. A person can create an environment.
And the really interesting thing about that is there is a ton of academic literature that supports exactly what you're describing, and it goes just beyond attitude to health outcomes and exercise and smoking and divorce. And it's crazy that if a certain percentage of people in your immediate 30 group of people get divorced, the odds of your divorce goes up.
Sure.
Or certain health outcomes, or it's
cancer, heart disease.
It's insane, but it, the environment you select for yourself.
Yeah, it's important.
Yeah, it really is. So let's talk about vision. You talk about having a vision and sticking with it, make it audacious and plausible.
A vision is really important. And I think a lot of people fall down for themselves and fall down at work because they do not have a vision. And
let me interrupt you a sec. When I started that chapter, I was like, here comes some vision board nonsense. And by the end of the chapter, I'm like, oh, okay, I totally get what she's saying. She's dead on. You totally won me over.
That's awesome. I agree with you. Vision is one of those right. highfalutin words. It's, fuzzy and wrapped in cotton.
Squishy.
It's a squishy word. But what I mean by vision is you need to articulate something new you want to be, or someplace new you would like to go. And the you in this case could be yourself, it could be your family, it could be your team, it could be the project you're working on. But I really believe that you should pick a point to be at a new place in the future. And the reason I think that's important is it keeps you motivated and it gives you a North Star to work towards and to look towards. One of the things I write a lot about is work is mundane. There's a lot of boring Mondays. There's a lot of Wednesdays.
Some of it's a grind.
It's a grind. And you know what? It's going to always be a grind. And having a vision makes the grind add up to something.
It becomes purposeful, and now you have an objective beyond
exactly
just the mundanity. Is that a word? Even?
Yeah, it's like the lemmingness of it all.
Huh. Interesting. So towards the end of the book, there's an interesting discussion, but I want to have you articulate it. How do you decide when it's time to go on? What determines when, for better or worse, time to go?
It's time to go. This is a hard one. I've always been really sensitive. I was always very insecure that I would run out of a job. When I lived in Boston, there was a point in time where Boston started to feel kind of small. And I worried that with every job that I got, that there would be less jobs for me to get in the future.
Isn't that true? As you work your way up the
ladder,
ladder,
there's
a million people. In a law firm, since you wanted to be a lawyer at one point, there's a million first-year associates.
Yeah.
And then there's only so many
There's
middle
4
associates. And then by the time you get to the top of the pyramid, it's 1 to 10 ratio of partners to worker bees. So that's true in most fields, right?
Exactly.
The better you do, the less choices you have.
The better you do, the less choices. And so what I always really wanted was that for every job I took, it opened the door to 5 new jobs, and it created new opportunity. And that was very important to me. And I think that that's important for people at work. And I think a lot of times what happens at work is you just get caught up in the who did what to whom and who screwed up on what and why. And that also is contagious. And when you find yourself distracted in that, you lose your vision, you lose your purpose, and you lose every hour that we spend at work, there is somebody else who is hungrier than you, smarter than you, with more talent than you, trying to do the same thing.
That environment sounds relentless.
It is.
Huh. So, by the way, when I first read that quote, I thought you were talking about the competitive nature of the world, not necessarily who you surround yourself, but both turn out to be true.
It's true.
So given that, what ultimately led you to the decision to join Food 52? Tell us a little bit about your new gig and how did you transition?
Yep. So sorry, and I missed your question on the last one.
Not at all.
So one of the funny things I think about this book is it's being written by someone who is in the midst of her own career and making mistakes every day and making choices every day. And, I was finishing this book just as we bought the company back from Penn. Mm-hmm. And so it was an odd experience for me where I'm writing about whether you stay or go in a job, and I'm meanwhile avoiding the question for myself: should I stay or go?
But it's back there, right? You hear the train whistle off in the distance.
Yeah, you do. Exactly.
You know what's coming.
Yep, that's right. So, I think for me, you should always be scaring yourself. You should always be putting yourself in an environment where maybe 70% of the stuff or 60% of the stuff, but you don't know 40% of the stuff. And I was very eager. The year 2023, we sold Barstool twice. We sold it first to Penn and then to Dave. And I came in 2016 with a goal of growing the company, I don't know, to $25 million. And,
you're going to double it.
We crushed it. Barstool will do $300 million in revenue.
Is that what they're up to now? That's a serious media number.
It's a big media company. And I was looking at my own career and myself and saying, God, I've exited this company twice in a year and we're going to do $300 million in revenue. Dave owns the pirate ship now, which is exactly how it should be. This is the right ending to this story. This is he's got this. I did what I came to do. And I like to work. So I wanted to still work. I still wanted to build something. I wanted to fix things. I wanted to be curious. I wanted to learn a lot, but I wanted to do it in a completely and radically different category. And so enter Food 52, which is, really incredible brand built on content, built on storytelling, built on community, 2 female founders, created in their kitchen. And it became, a really interesting commerce platform for home and food and table, but also a really interesting content platform. And I think there's a huge amount of potential. Home is an immensely big category. Women are an exceptionally interesting audience. And the idea of taking what I learned at Barstool and obviously all the places before and bringing that to this was very interesting.
And if you had to pick something that was 180 degrees from Barstool, a woman co-founded home and food site, I mean, that's
pretty much it.
Right?
Yeah.
So what has it been like teeing up? This is new. You started last month.
Yeah, I'm brand new. It's funny. I had gotten approached by a lot of companies in sports and a lot of sports betting companies and
been there, done
kind
that.
of men's lifestyle. And I was like, look, if I'm going to do any of that, I'm going to stay. Barstool's the best.
Right.
Like, there's no chance I'm leaving Barstool if I want to work in sports. And so I
even if like an ESPN or
Especially.
The Athletic,
Definitely.
like you don't want to be involved in a big corporate owned institution like that.
I don't think any company in sports could replicate what we created at Barstool.
Well, they wouldn't want to replicate it. They would want to pick and choose.
Yeah, they'd want to morph that into their. But that to me is, I feel very loyal to Barstool, so I'm like, that would feel disingenuous, I think. But it is radically different. It is. And it's a different company. It's been around since, 2014. It's been through a lot of eras. It's had a lot of different management teams. So, it's very different from going into Barstool, where Barstool, there was just nothing built. And here it's like, okay, I got to take down the scaffolding and I got to rebuild it back up. So it's very, very different. But I'm learning a lot and I'm enjoying it.
All right. So before we get to our favorite questions that I ask all of our guests, I got to throw one curveball question at you about the book, because I honestly don't know the answer to this. Who is the book written for? Because as I was prepping and doing the research for this, this is a book for a bunch of young women in their careers. But by the time I'm through this, that wasn't my takeaway.
Yeah.
Is that a fair
question, Barry?
But I mean, it's a
big debate.
Yeah, but in your mind, who was the target audience when you began, and how might that have changed when you finished it?
I think this book is for anybody who cares about what they do all day, which I realize is kind of a nothing answer. But I do think this book can speak to you if you're motivated, you care, maybe you're stuck, maybe you lost your way, maybe you want to change, and you're 40 or you're 20. I think on its face value, it looks like a book for 20-somethings, 30-somethings. Mm-hmm. But I hope that when people read it, whether, you're getting it for your kid for graduation or, it's funny, I'm noticing this thing in the world, probably because I'm now working with more women, where there's a lot of women who are going back to work after their kids are grown. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a perfect book for women trying to go back to work. I think it's a great book for 30-something men in investment banking. Like, if you're motivated, if you care to have somebody's perspective on how to win at work and what it's going to take and all the things you're going to mess up along the way there, I think this is a good book for you.
think it does a nice job at that, too.
Thank you.
So you must be very proud of this, especially this is your first book.
It is.
That's a tough
yeah, that's good.
item. And I'm gonna get to a couple of questions that I think you'll find interesting relative to the book. Let's jump to our favorite questions, starting with what has been keeping you entertained these days, be it podcasts or Netflix. What are you streaming?
Oh, I love content. So I
know who I'm talking to.
I watch a lot of content. I'm trying to watch this documentary called Carterland on Jimmy Carter. Have you heard about this?
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it.
I watched it on a Delta flight. I cannot find it. Last night I downloaded Max. I looked up Hulu. I was on Paramount. I was on Netflix. I was on Amazon. There actually is a problem in discovery of specific
Discovery
content.
is the biggest challenge
it's just
in
such
streaming.
a problem.
And nobody does it well.
Nobody. So I was trying to watch that last night. I ended up watching Explained by Vox. I don't know if you've watched that.
I know Vox does these explainers.
Yes. It's like a great little series, like 24 minutes. We watched plastic surgery, cults, and fairy tales.
Huh. That's really interesting.
Yeah,
what did they say about cults? Because I have a great book if that interests you.
Was very interesting. Just the dynamics. It's all the same fundamentals. of how a cult is created.
So this guy named Will Storr was I want to say a journalist out of Australia, and he used to embed himself
Interesting.
with like all the wackiest cults.
Yep.
So it was the Flat Earthers,
Yep.
the Holocaust deniers, like the
Jim Jones,
vax people,
yeah.
right. And what surprised in the book was not that these people are all nuts. It's that something very fundamental early in their building of their personal model of the universe is askew, and everything built on top of that is off.
It's also a little askew.
So it's not that they're crazy; it's that there's a mistake early
Yes.
in their interactions with the world, and they can't. You have so much invested in your personal sense of identity and your tribe. It's why politics is so.
Yeah, it's funny because that was my take. I was like, oh, politics is a cult.
Yeah, well, it's very tribal, and
Yep.
but anyway, if you're at all interested in
I
that,
will.
I thought "Heretics of Science" by Will Storr.
Ooh, okay,
really,
that's a great
really
title.
fascinating. All right, so you mentioned those two. Any other streamers? You're a big podcast person. What
I'm
do
a
you?
big pod. I mean, I listen to the Barstool podcasts.
Still, you haven't
Yeah,
broken the
definitely.
habit yet.
No, that's enough for me.
Huh, that's really interesting. So normally here I ask about your mentors. Obviously, Joanne Bradford is going to come up. Tell us about who helped shape your career.
Oh, so many people. I was really, really fortunate. Joanne was an incredible mentor. I worked for her for 12 years. Wenda Millard, who was kind of the opposite of Joanne at Yahoo, she's been an incredible mentor. I have a really great women's mafia where, women who are older than me, women who are younger than me. So I feel very grateful I've been able to learn from pretty much everybody.
That's great. So I mentioned that other book. Let's talk about some of your favorites and what you're reading right now.
I'm reading a book right now called The Girl Who Smiled Beads, which is about the Rwandan genocide. So I was in Rwanda in February. Loved it. So I'm reading a book about the genocide, and then I'm very late on this novel called A Little Life, which I'm also reading.
Someone else recommended that.
It's supposed to be amazing. It's like a group of friends in New York City.
Interesting. And our final two questions, and the first one is, perfect for the book. What sort of advice would you give a recent college grad interested in a career in either media, content, management today?
I would give anybody graduating from college the advice just to get a job and to work your butt off. And it really doesn't matter so much, those first couple jobs, what industry it's in or where it's located. I think I was always a little bit scared when I was, not a little bit, I was scared when I was in my 20s to like jump out of the nest. And if I were to do it all over again, I would have moved to California in my 20s and worked my butt off and then come back to the East Coast. I really think it's an incredible time in your life where you can do pretty much anything without a whole lot of compromise and without a whole lot of consequence.
Right.
And I think it's also oddly this time in your life where you feel most uncertain. And so if you can get over that and do it, I think great things can come from it.
When you don't have a mortgage or kids in school, you could take a risk, and if you fail, you try over.
Who cares? Which you can still fail, and that, that's a big message of the book. Anyone can fail. Everyone does fail all the time. But the reverberations of failure start to affect other people, the older you get.
When you have a 50-year professional horizon, you want to make mistakes in
Early.
year 1 through 10, not
right.
year 30 through 40.
That's right. Yep.
The consequences are, it's not just, we had fun with a whole lot of vocabulary words. It's not just the resiliency, but the ability to recover and shake it off.
Yeah.
You don't get that when you're 55, 65 in a career. I think that's great advice. Our final question, what do you know about the world of media, content, marketing today you wish you knew in the late 90s when you were first getting started?
Ooh, that is a great question, Barry. I think I'm so grateful to have worked in content and media and to have tripped into this internet in the late 90s. I don't think I would have this ride if I were to jump into this now, or the luxury of that much change. So, I think media content consumption, consumers, they're just so fragmented. And it's deafening, the amount of fragmentation. Things that used to be 30 minutes are now 3 seconds. And so I think the fragmentation and the speed and the volume of content is really overwhelming. I wonder if the world will start to go more offline.
There's a discussion taking place about the death of the internet. I don't know how much of that is an exaggeration, but the balkanization process that you're describing, it's real.
Yeah.
And, back in the day, there were 3 networks. You'd go to the office and there would be water cooler conversations about the broadcast show last night.
Yep.
Every word in that sentence is anachronistic.
Yeah.
None of those things
None
exist
of that
anymore.
exists. Exactly.
There's no more water coolers. There's no more broadcasts.
Yep.
There are no real office discussions like
Yep.
that. The world has changed.
Well, and to your earlier point, you and I could have somehow, in a miraculous fashion, watched the same thing last night.
Right.
But what you saw and what I saw will be dramatically different.
And that's the challenge of an algo-driven media world, is that no two people are seeing the same exact thing anymore. It's crazy. Well, Erika, thank you for being so generous with your time.
You.
This has been delightful. We have been speaking with Erika Ayers Badan. She is the author of Nobody Cares About Your Career, Why Failure is Good, The Great Ones Play Hurt, and Other Hard Truths. If you enjoy this conversation, well, check out any of the previous 500 and change we've had over the past 10 years. You can find those at iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you find your favorite podcast. Check out my new podcast, At the Money, 10-minute conversations with experts about your money, earning it, spending it, and most importantly, investing it. At the Money, wherever you find your favorite podcasts, and here in the Masters in Business feed. I would be remiss if I did not thank the crack staff that helps put these conversations together each week. John Wasserman is my audio engineer. Atika Valbron is my project manager. Sean Russo is my researcher. Anna Luke is my producer. Sage Bauman is the head of podcasts here at Bloomberg. I'm Barry Ritholtz. You've been listening to Masters in Business on Bloomberg Radio.